Volha Hapiejeva was born in 1982. She's an active scholar, as well as one of the leading Belarusian poets of today, with strong principles and beliefs, remarkable openness about her problems and aspirations, and enjoyment of fantasy, wit, and experiment. She's also made original and highly imaginative contributions to prose and drama, but it is to her verse up to 2018 that the present paper is mostly dedicated, beginning with one of her most frequent themes. Loneliness and sexual frustration are undoubtedly a major part of the writer's feminist consciousness. At times deliberately shocking, she also depicts affection, as well as displaying a strong awareness of the richness of the Belarusian language. Volha Hapiejeva's great talents and drive has led to many positions in residence, not least in Germany and Austria. She's undoubtedly, in my mind, one of the most striking Belarusian poets of the present day. As with any true poet, or indeed artist or composer, Hapiejeva's work is easily recognizable, as is her approach to the theme of loneliness, which takes many forms. In niby ja naumysnie imknuся do одиноty, it's as if I deliberately strive towards loneliness, for instance. She confronts the phenomenon directly. Travel plays a considerable role in Hapiejeva's work, but in an earlier poem, Bratia Lumière, the Lumières were brothers, airports, trains, and bus stations are described as transit points between loneliness A and loneliness B. This verse ends with the poet wishing to escape quotidian routine and to forget herself for a moment, to become nobody, simply the body that is being embraced on platform 11 at a station in a town beginning with L. In another poem, Obloki Piraspielie, the overripe clouds, the narrator's bird-like gaze observes the clouds making love, having drunk their fill of stale loneliness. This affliction in the poet's world appears to be particularly pertinent to women. For example, in a verse, Mnie u samocie, to me in my loneliness, she describes the dumb urban space and its loneliness, saying that the rucksack with its pockets was clearly created by a woman who understood solitariness and ways of escaping it. To be a feminist in a determinedly patriarchal society is not easy, even for a strong person like Volha Hapiejeva, who also writes about her lovers criticizing her language, probably because he prefers the unfortunately prevalent use of Russian. I shall say a little more about linguistic provocations later. An important feminist poem is Kalibi ja żyła u chodzie 1908, If I Had Lived in 1908, in which the poet imagines herself as the British suffragette leader, Emmeline Pankhurst, taking part in demonstrations. But it is never the right time and place, nor would she want to be a person helping her husband to publish his books like Sofia Andreevna Tolstoy's wife, copying and recopying his novel War and Peace. But Hapiejeva was born in Minsk and now has to get dressed and ignore male journalists and editors. One ambiguous poem, perhaps related to feminism, is Taki budu stajać, so I shall just stand, in which she contemplates living together with indifference and having children. A pasля u nas nawet zjawce dzieci, jakim my u swój honor nie dadzim ani jakich imionów. I kochanie dla nas zastaniece niejaka rodu. And afterwards, we shall even have children, to whom, in our honor, we shall not give any names, and love for us will remain without any gender. The strongest unambiguous statement of the poet's feminism is in the play Tam, and I shall end with a quotation from it. One of her main ironic verses is «Думаете, мужчины разважают про глобальные усвети?» Do you think that men reflect on global issues in the world? And another poem, «Чему так долго квитнеют каштаны?» Why do chestnut trees bloom for so long? Ostensibly about trees, soon turning to the question of why people marry and what in love means. The answers of grown-ups are unsatisfactory, and the fading of flowers in the wind seems a good reason for the poet to remain in what she calls her hole. She should go visiting or create a poem so that later some female critic would write that her work was about nature or about love. In one poem, she receives no response from her lover when she tells him about the metaphysics of power in the feminist criticism of language. And when she mentions Foucault and the discipline of language, his response is decidedly crude. И он запытается: «А ты бы хотела, чтобы я тебе дисциплинировал пухой?» Никаких высоких материй и квадратура круга. Чистая геометрия размещения меня у просторе. Механика тел без сантиментов и перемову. She asks, and would you like me to discipline you with a whip? No lofty materials and squaring of the circle, the simple geometry of placing me in space, and the mechanics of bodies without sentiments and negotiation. Piesocny Motyl, the sand butterfly, is a poem dedicated to male and female feminists, in which he describes female and male ways of reading their verses. Women keep their poems quiet, while men breathe theirs out, even in the metro, not waiting for peace and respect. The poet clearly feels out of place in the male literary world. Finally, on this particular topic, I might mention «Так долго бывает часом», how amazing it sometimes is. A rather mysterious poem about communication and memory, particularly of childhood, including running to the swimming pool, «Каб разом утопить несправедливость патриархатного света», in order together to drown the injustice of the patriarchal world. A particularly drastic untitled poem that begins with a deliberately ungrammatical line, «Ты помер мне у снежни», you died me in December, reflects her great pain, illustrated with a series of images, including the 7 circles of hell and a death. The ending is particularly pathetic. «Беспритульно бодяться, и литостью наивеликшей для меня стане мой боль». To wander without refuge, and for me the greatest comfort will be my pain. Turning to classical literature, she speaks of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, although she thinks that Dulcinea was less than essential. Dulcinea, видовочно, была залишней, si просто законом жанру прикметы эпохи. Dulcinea was clearly superfluous, or simply the law of the genre, a sign of the age. In Dziewczyna, Girl, the poet compares herself to Ophelia looking for Hamlet. She too is living in one of life's reservations and longing to escape. In the game of life, only she holds the trump card of resentment. Agree with them. In another poem, Znowu uczysz mnie cierpieniu, again you are teaching me patience, the poet's nitpicking boyfriend provides a good example of, in this case, male criticisms of her Belarusian language. Znowu uczysz mnie cierpieniu i покрысе niekiej swojej mowie, bo to jak ja rozmawiаю, mowy ty nazwać nie gotowy. Tak нельзя сказать, так не кажуть. Эта літера вимовляється іначе. І чому раптом нацість скаче? Ти цілуєш мене за взятістю коменданта, каб вигребці нерозуміння з роту. І коли нічого не застанеться, я відчую себе ідіотом. Again, you teach me patience, and little by little, to some language of yours, for the way I speak, you are not prepared to call a language. You cannot say it like that. People do not say that. This letter is pronounced differently. And why does the accent suddenly jump? You kiss me with the zealousness of a commandant in order to scrape lack of understanding from my mouth. And when nothing is left, I feel myself an idiot. I shall end this brief survey with a quotation from Hapiejeva's play Tam, there, set on a railway train. The guard, disappointed that all the women he thought had coveted his body have gone away, reflects on the female nature. Природа женщин клопотится про інших. Так, это не я придумал, так навіть по телевізії кажуть. Тому вас буфетчица, прибиральщица, нянечка, медсестра – это и есть сапраўдные занятки для сапраўдных женщин. И они по природе так судженные, а не тому, что мужчины не хотят робить эту брудную, низкоплатную, никем неповажанную, бесперспективную працу. The nature of women is to care for others. Yes, I didn't think this up. They even say it's on TV. Therefore, barmaid, lavatory cleaner, nanny, medical sister are the real occupations for real women. They're destined to it by nature, and not because men do not want to do this dirty, badly paid, undervalued, and dead-end work, end quote. The last words of this powerful play are, "Ну вот и всё. Теперь головным буду я." Well, that's all there is to it. Now I shall be the main one. In my short paper, I've touched on only one aspect of Hapiejeva's multifaceted poetry, although I've lapsed into her last play, because I'm so fond of it. A fuller description of this writer's work has been published in Verbum, the English language version of Diaslo, and in Kikliewicz's yearbook, Przegląd Wschódnoeuropejski. I've also written an article about her prose and verse between 2019 and 2021, which I expect will be published in Australian, Slavic, and East European Studies later in the year. Dziękuję za uwagę. Thank you. In fact, this is off.
Thank you very much, Arnold. And now I would like to welcome our next speaker, Anna Rakityanskaya, who is a librarian for Russian and Belarusian collections for Harvard College Library. She's a co-founder and co-convener of the Slavic, East European and Eurasian Studies Affinity Group, at the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation and a member of the Subcommittee on Collection Development at the Association for Slavic, East European and Eurasian Studies. Anna's specific professional interests include creating, describing, and curating collections of ephemeral and not traditional materials in both physical and born digital formats. Anna curates Belarusian Politics and Society Web Archive under the auspices of the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation. Her most recent article, Video Appeals to the President of Russia, Creating a Born Digital Primary Source Collection, was published in the latest issue of Slavic and East European Information Resources. And Anna's title today is Web Archiving the Belarusian Protests, Issues, Perspectives, and the Role of Curated Collection. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Yeah, okay. Hello, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak at this conference today. I'm going to share my screen right now. See if it works. One second. Okay. Okay. Okay, can you see my presentation? Oh, okay, great. Okay, so there's no doubt that Belarusian protests of 2020 and the events in the month that followed them have been linked very closely to internet. Internet publishing, in fact, has been the primary method of coordination, reporting, and reflection during and after the protests. So the need to archive this material was perceived as urgent very early on. But what exactly needed to be done? Contrary to our immediate instinct, archiving Belarusian web content had not been a clean slate. If we look at the whole opposition web content from the point of view of web archiving possibilities and practices, we see that it splits into two major segments. So on one hand, we have major media output, and that includes the opposition media as well, the various sites by the opposition belonging to opposition parties, politicians. And on the other hand, we have the grassroots content produced by the citizens, results of the citizens' activities. And so when we talk about media and opposition sites, these have long been the focus of attention of Internet Archive's own web archiving initiatives. Internet Archive, of course, is the world's largest and oldest open access web archive, and there are several global scale web archiving projects that within Internet Archive that crawl basically all news sources around the world. Their main purpose is to gather material for computational research. So there are more than one and even more than 20 such projects. One of the biggest is, for example, GDELT project, which stands for Global Database of Events, Language, and Tone. Other projects include Wikipedia outlinks, Twitter outlinks, Media Cloud, and many, many others. So any media outlet in Belarus that was visible and heard widely prior to and during the election and the following protests is likely to be already crawled. And if it's a long-standing one, then chances are that it's been crawled for a while. For example, we can take Tutbay. So here is the screenshot of what happens if you enter Tutbay into Wayback Machine. Wayback Machine, of course, is the public interface, public access to the web archive, the web archiving of the Internet Archive. And so we can see here the calendar of web crawls of Tutbay. We can see that it has been crawled starting with the end of the year 2000 through May of 2001. We can see that it's been crawled very actively. We see a lot of black color here, and we see that it's been crawled virtually every day. when we want to see who did that crawling, we need to go to the collections tab. And here we see a pretty long list of various web archiving initiatives that included Tudbai into their projects. And what you see here is just part of that long list. I couldn't fit everything here. Of course, the question of quality of those scrolls, the quality of web archiving is a separate question that should be a topic of another conversation. So not all those scrolls produce good quality, but yet still we can see that this is a title that has been taken good care of. And the same goes for all the sites associated with the opposition parties and major opposition figures. So basically, we don't worry about them too much because these sites are being preserved, they're being web archived. So what should we worry about? We worry about the grassroots content. This is the most fragile segment of Belarusian political internet. It has to do with citizen participation, self-organization, and general public response to the events. So what are these types of online grassroots content that are very specific and characteristic for Belarusian protests? So it's all the activity in the field of various kinds of activism: political, social, legal, local news media, social media, personal blogs, some is that publishing, and all sorts of creative response. We have song, poetry, satire, animation, and all this kind of thing. And the formats of this content vary greatly, from Telegram channels to YouTube videos, social media posts, petitions, open letters of all sorts, databases, online forums, and of course, websites themselves. So these activities are at the heart of the Belarusian protests, and that's where the academic libraries and diaspora institutions should come in, because we are able to offer a curated approach to web archiving versus the catch-all approach of the global crawlers. We can do manual selection, and we can catch things that are not mentioned or mentioned only very briefly by the major media. We can get those smaller things, the short-lived things. So the history of the curated archiving of Belarusian web content started with Georgetown University, who pioneered this work in 2007 and 2010. They ran a project archiving Belarusian sites that they considered fragile at the time. When it comes to the event reflecting archiving the events of 2020, we have right now two major academic collections in the Internet Archive. It says Belarus Crisis 2020-2021, curated at the University of California, Berkeley, and we have Belarusian Politics and Society, curated under the auspices of the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation, which I actually curate, and I will talk more about that. So the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation Web Art Collecting Program's mission is to build curated thematic collections of freely available but at-risk web content in order to support research at participating libraries and beyond. And that's what we're trying to do. So we launched our archive in 2020. At this point, we have 339 sites, seeds in the language of web archiving, archived, represented on this page. And the archive is highly structured, highly curated. It is described in a lot of detail. So we have categories of content, which you can see on the left here in that screenshot, the facets for discovering the archive, and they include subject, type, language, coverage, political group, occupational group, personalities, country, and organization. So last week I ran a URL check on those sites, and I found that 36 of them are now dead, which means they are no longer accessible. And I looked at those sites, and I realized, and I analyzed their content, and I realized that they can be presented, if we arrange those categories chronologically, they sort of reflect the development of the events in waves. So the first wave of those dead sites were produced by or related to the participants in the presidential election campaign. The second one is related to the protest activities, and that includes sites with instructions for resistance activities, independent labor unions, eyewitness reporting of all sorts. We have news media, photographs, de-anonymization sites, general criticism of the authorities, public appeals against police brutality, and all sorts of creative response as well. And the third wave of the deleted sites are the sites with the content that reflects aftermath of the official reaction to the protests. Here we have fundraising initiatives, charitable foundations organizing help for victims of political persecution, like political prisoners, or aid to pro-opposition policemen, for example. We have all sorts of political, social, residential, and legal activism. Of course, the content loss cannot be reduced to just the number of sites that are actually inactive. There are some URLs that exist that are live, but the content have completely changed. And I'm not going to go into more details of that right now. I spoke about it more in November last year at the ACES convention, how the content loss occurs. Belarusian web content. And so what are the next steps in our work? So first of all, the first step would be to continue web collecting. While understanding all the difficulties that we may face on this route, we will still continue. The second one is a new collaboration with the Skaryna Belarusian Library and Museum. It is a new development that I'm very happy to report on. Now the Skaryna Library will be co-curating this archive with us, with Harvard, and with our colleagues at Stanford University and University of Chicago. And I think that collaboration between an academic organization, institution, and a diaspora institution is a very productive way forward. And in general, web archiving thrives in a collaborative environment. And also we continue collecting sites in the Zotero library, which is not as selective as web archive. You can, and anyone can be part of that. So Zotero library is just a list of all the sites. It's not an archive, but it's a list of links. And I will drop a link to all the sites that I mentioned in this presentation at the end, after the end of my presentation. So I do invite you to contribute both to the Zotero library and to the web archive. There is a way to do that too. And finally, one more step that I think would be very useful in this work is to create a Belarus web archiving library guide, so-called LibGuide, which would bring together all the Belarus-related web archiving initiatives and provide sort of a portal to web archives related to Belarus. Thank you very much for your attention. I will drop in the links in the chat in a second. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this. This is a fascinating project, and we are very, very proud to be collaborating with you. We will have time to ask you questions later, but now I'll present our final participant of the panel, Aristide LaVey. Aristide is a New York-based archivist specializing in the development, preservation, and dissemination of artistic information. Recent projects include developing a digital archive for Belarusian protest textiles for the University of Michigan, instituting catalog standards for Belarusian, Russian, Soviet, and Ukrainian materials at the American Philatelic Research Library, and curating George Balakin's digital ballet heritage. Scientific interests include the creative function of digital archives and textiles as cultural texts. LaVey's article, Reading Belarus, the evolving semiosis of Belarusian textiles, can be found in the October 2021 issue of the Journal of Belarusian Studies. Aristide's title today is Archiving the Digital Semiosphere, a Study in Belarus. Welcome, Aristide.
Thank you very much. I'm certainly happy to be here once again. Now I will start my screen sharing process. Can you see everything? Right. So good afternoon and thank you. Oops, having some technical problems. Right. Good afternoon and thank you. My research explores a grassroots community archive developed to disseminate and preserve digital protest art during the 2020 presidential election. Art is a communicative system, a language, and in my 2021 article, Reading Belarus, I argue that Belarusian art is Belarus's main method for communicating Belarusians. The ability for Belarusians to describe, define, and communicate Belarusian culture through their art is what semiotician Yuri Lotman terms as cultural auto-communication. In this presentation, I focus on Chrysalis Mag, the online Belarusian contemporary art magazine, and show how its project became a source for Belarusian cultural auto-communication, challenging authoritarian norms of political power and centrality of state-based art archival systems. Lotman's semiotics of culture and the ideas of the Tartu-Moscow semiotic school are absent from the American Library and Information Sciences research, which tends to be dominated by American and British researchers who often disregard cultural aspects relating to the signification of archives and other information spaces. Semioticians Indrek Ubris and Mario Yama have decided to lay a strong foundation connecting Lotman's ideas to archives, especially as they relate to digital archiving. A key to understanding Lotman is the understanding of his concept of semiosphere, as he defined the result and the condition for the development of culture, or the semiotic space outside of which semiosis, the process of signification, cannot exist. It is an abstract place, but can overlap a geographical space and has the ability to transcend both time and space. The semiosphere is where culture functions, allowing for information to be created, translated, and preserved. There are multiple, indeed possibly infinite, semiospheric or hierarchical levels in culture. For example, the semiospheres within our practice, location, nationality, and language are all stratified within the semiosphere of our global culture. Ibrosino Yama, along with media researcher Young Hartley, have suggested the notion of the digital semiosphere based upon Lotman's semiospheric structure, which they define as the framework for global digital culture in its political, economic, and environmental context. It is within this framework that I analyze Belarusian protest art digital archive. The digital semiosphere is an apt way to look at the Belarusian protests because this election was different from the previous elections in that digital media played a large part of the protests and was and remains a key tool for the democratic opposition in their message for the world. Chrysalis was started in 2018 with the purpose and goal of popularizing Belarusian contemporary art within Belarus by showing the work of Belarusian artists and developing an artistic community while strongly contributing to the popularization of Belarusian contemporary art outside of its borders. Before August 2020, the magazine's digital content, available via their website and prolific social media accounts, focused on interviews with artists, exhibition notices, and reviews in a wide variety of different types of traditional and digital Belarusian art. 2020 was indeed a year for politically art, especially when Belarusian painter Chaim Sotinzeva became a symbol of the opposition and therefore a threat to the Alexander Lukashenko regime. ultimately becoming the year's first artistic symbols of protest. However, in August, with images of daily state-sponsored violence against protesters protesting the election outcome, Chrysalis' social media feed, specifically its Instagram, changed and exclusively started to post politically charged protest art. The site began soliciting protest art submissions from artists and reported that they had started an archive on their website to preserve what were mostly digital-born objects. Well, later that year, the Ivy Plus Library Confederation announced the launch of the Belarusian Politics and Society web archive. And a month later, Chrysalis announced that their website would soon be indexed within it. The archive on Chrysalis' website is divided chronologically by month and includes the name and piece and the artist, and is hyperlinked indexed to the artist's Instagram account. The archive is not constrained as it is on the Instagram platform in regard to shape and size of artworks and allows for magnification. In June 2021, Chrysalis' founder reported that they had taken the protest archive portion of the website offline in response to newly passed legislation in Belarus targeting anti-extremism and specifically threatening independent media. Well, not directly a target, Chrysalis' transformation into a protest archive brought this contemporary art museum from the periphery of the Belarusian semiosphere into the very public space of the Belarusian digital semiosphere, especially with its .by internet domain managed by the Operations and Analysis Center under the President of the Republic of Belarus. According to Lotman, the periphery of the semiosphere is a place of accelerated cultural development due to the freedom it enjoys, in contrast to the semiosphere's more rigid and dominant core. In this example, the Belarusian Museum. Semiosis is engaged within the semiosphere through the active interaction and the dynamic tension between the authoritarian core and the periphery, and the power structures of the core, which require total control, will always feel threatened by the invasion of newer, more creative periphery. Chrysalis' digital curation is an attempt to collect, organize, and preserve Belarus's cultural heritage, but simply aggregating content is not enough to make it an archive. Oyama suggests that in order to render it accessible and usable in a meaningful manner, a collection needs to be systematized and described. In other words, needs to be provided with metadata. By including metadata and hyperlinks within the resource record of Chrysalis' digital archive, the information not only describes the resource, but actively connects it to the rest of the archive, and through multilingual hashtags, create a dialogue with global users via participatory discovery by hyperlinked exploratory browsing. These links, especially the cross-language or intercultural intersemiotic translations outside of the Belarusian semiosphere, highlight the digital archive's ability to not only preserve information, but to actively create new artistic information and generate meaning, creating hotspots of cultural dialogue. Chrysalis' MAG initially used its digital platform according to its mission statement to propagate Belarusian art, but knew that this digital platform can be notoriously unstable, especially within current Belarusian political culture. Chrysalis saw value in protest art as a new mode of Belarusian self-description and a contemporary look at Belarus in time, also knowing that this visual information would likely not be preserved otherwise. Within the digital archive, they are not only curating this artistic information, making it accessible to all, but they are also creating dynamic linkage for the collection's creative recontextualization and the ability to generate new meaning, contributing to an updated self-portrait of Belarus, and directly challenging popular ideas of its invisibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aristide. And I would like to thank all the presenters in this panel. We will now open the floor to questions. So please, to ask a question, raise your virtual or physical hand or write a question in the chat space, and then we'll invite you to read it out later. So any questions so far? Jarek has a question.
Thank you very much for all the presentations. I enjoyed them a lot. I have a question for Anna, actually. And I think it's a fascinating project which you initiated. And I'm yet to learn more about the collaboration between the library and the university, of which I am an alumnus, by the way. We actually tried to do our own archive, web archive, and we face the problem that it's not that easy to conserve the website because you need to update it. There's certain things happening to it all the time. So we ended up having just a copy of that website, like a living website, which we are trying to maintain. And also they consume quite a lot of I don't know, energy or space, and so they attract a lot of attention as well if these were popular sites in the past. So how do you manage this technically? Is there a piece of software which you are using, and can it be used by people themselves, let's say if they want to submit it? And if you could say a few words about the planned collaboration with the library, I would be grateful. And so it's a question both for Anna and Aristide, if you have anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, thank you for this question. So yes, actually, I do know that web archiving is a very, very, very difficult process technically, but fortunately, me personally, I don't have to worry about that at all, because I am only curating this archive within the framework of the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation web collecting program. So the Ivy Plus Library Confederation have this program established specifically, in order to assist librarians, curators to do this work. There is actually a web archivist that is hired by the Ivy Plus Library Confederation, who doesn't work for any specific university, but that person works for the Ivy Plus Library Confederation. And that person takes care of all the technical aspects of web archiving. And the librarians are only dealing with the actual curation. So we are concerned with the content and the metadata. And that's what we do. And that makes this whole process extremely easy. Relatively easy, but yes, very enjoyable, I would say too. So that's how it's done. And in order to co-curate a collection, each collection has to have at least 2 curators from the Ivy Plus institutions, from Ivy Plus universities, but it can also have co-curators from other institutions, and this does happen. And so this will be the case with the Belarusian Politics and Society web archive, when Igor will be participating, will be co-curating the archive with me. We'll be meeting next week, so you'll hear more about that, about the details of that work. And I'm very, very, very hopeful that it will be very productive.
Thank you very much, Anna. And here present is Igor Ivanov, who is the representative of the library, who is in charge of that project. And thank you very much.
Great. Bye,
Igor. Aristide, would you like to add anything?
No, I don't have anything specifically to say about that, but I know that Anna certainly has been working on it from the very start. In fact, when I started thinking about these things, I was still in Belarus, so I was definitely emailing both Chrysalis and certainly adding my recommendations to Anna's list as well. But I think it shows great foresight into knowing that certain things need to be preserved, especially right now in this time of the precarity of digital information. So the books in the library that you have behind you have probably been there for 100 years and will probably be there in another 100 years. But the things on this website can be gone in a moment. In fact, when I started writing my paper, halfway through, the website went down. So this paper that I was presenting today was not intending to go that way, but it was only because after that law was passed and they decided to take it down, that my paper changed directions. And again, it's still alive, hopefully somewhere, but hundreds and thousands of other websites within Belarus with .by codes are gone forever. They're never coming back, and there's no way to find them again. So Vanna's certainly doing her bit to help preserve these sites, these places of digital culture. So I'm delighted to also hear that she's joined up with the library, another very important space in our world.
Thank you. Any more questions? There's a question from Pavel.
I have a question for the archivist and a question for Arnold as well. How do you deal with the sheer volume of those sort of not necessarily website, but for example chats? You know, because they're less of the written communication, they're more like sort of oral communications. The sheer volume, and I appreciate the fragility, but also because you know in writing people sort of think twice before they put something in writing, whereas in chats it's more like talking. You know, there's a sheer volume of information which may or may not be valuable. How do you sort of sieve through it? I'd be interested. And question for Arnold, do you have a favorite poem or favorite poet? Belarusian, that's it.
Well, they've all died apart from Volha Hapiejeva. All the ones I respect, apart, of course, Nikolaev, but I've written about many of them, and I thought for my last effort I'd write about her latest thing, since nobody else much writes about her because she's so anti-men and sorry.
Thank you, Arnold. Over to you, Anna.
Okay, yes, so it's a good question about chats and social media in general. So there are many limitations to what we can web archive. And unfortunately, social media are mostly out of reach for us. So no Facebook, no Instagram. We can archive Twitter, we can archive live journal, but that's about it. We can do Telegram channels, but if you consider Telegram as a social media, but only we can archive Telegram channels in their browser version, web browser version. But chats as such, not really. So, and it's on one hand, it's too bad because of course they are a rich source of information. But on the other hand, there are legal limitations and legal limitations and technical limitations. So yeah, it's an issue.
I just wanted to add that last December I attended, took part in a roundtable on the Belarusian studies or study in Belarus at the ASEES, the Association for Slavonic, East European and Eurasian Studies. And there was so much hunger for the work that you are doing. There's so much demand in the fresh information on the protests, reliable and classified, that can be accessed by the researchers in the West. So it is very, very timely, and we are all very, very grateful for your work. I can just, sorry. There's a question from Igor.
Okay, I probably it's not a question, it's probably more common, but you may be able to elaborate on my thinking, and just to start with extending what Karalina just mentioned. It's not only that researchers in the West are absolutely hungry for this work and will use it in value. I get quite often emails from people who are engaged in various activities in Belarus who are absolutely crying from sadness that a lot of material that they're aware of has been created in Belarus and it disappears, for example, because the police comes to the offices of publishers and everything is being destroyed just because that material was just on one computer and somewhere on the internet, and that website, as Aristide said, it just goes offline and that's it. Unless it's been archived, it's gone. But also what I has recently become aware that there is a certain ethical aspect to that when we archive materials online. A lot of people in Belarus actually would like some materials to be taken offline just to be safe for their own safety. And that's where web archiving may be a problem. And I presume that libraries, all kinds of cultural institutions, has always had to deal with such ethical issues in the past, that we collect something that can be presented to other people as an accusation, etc. Now with the web, it just become tremendous danger for some people. I don't know how we will deal with that. That's all from me.
Yeah, absolutely, Igor. Yes, this is the issue that I'm well aware of. I'm going to address it with, with our web archivist, with the new web archivist, the Ivy Plus, who is starting on March 1st, I think. So we'll try to see what we can do about this. But yeah, definitely.
Thank you. We have one more question from Alan, and then
oh goodness. Well, I wanted a separate one for Arnold, and I'll give a clue. Sorry, one separate question for Arnold, which I'll come to maybe after the archival one, so Arnold could think how he's going to respond to a question relating to Vera Rich and the relationship with Olga, if there ever was one, and if not, why not? So I'll leave you to pause on that one while I ask the archivist. Alan Flowers, as somebody who was very heavily engaged in actions, not only 2020, but in years before, I'm very aware of the enormous archival task that both of you have. So this is really a question to both Anna and Aristide. I didn't quite pick up, particularly in Aristide's contribution, the aspects of the acoustic work, the very many protest songs. I think at one concert by February 2021, somebody stood up and said, well, this is one of over 500 protest songs that have been written in the last 6 months. It's massive. The video work, people surfacing, there's a brilliant animation artist, Yulia Ruditskaya's work, I'm sure some of you are aware of. So the all aspects, we saw a lot, and Aristide's rather focused a lot on the visual art, the sort of two-dimensional. But where are we with the video aspects that you're pulling off, and that's also particularly Anna with the vast amount of material. YouTube's full of it, for example, but also the performing arts. I mean, I mustn't forget the theatre. There was a lot of theatre productions, and they were captured, the new writings. So just a brief comment about that whole spectrum of the creative arts. Where's the balance in the work you're doing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll take one more question, and then we'll turn to the participants.
Thanks very much. I have a question for Arnold. Can you say that Hapiejeva, the poet you've been talking about, is a unique voice in contemporary Belarusian literature in respect of addressing gender issues and those subjects you were talking about, like loneliness?
Well, loneliness is an absolute topos amongst the very many people, but it's one of her main themes. But the gender business, I'm ignorant. I can't tell you about her fellow feminists because she never mentioned them to me, and I haven't read them either. And I read prose and poetry, basically. And if I'm not very interested in the political side of it, but I know that you can get into terrible trouble in Belarus for all sorts of things. I remember the lecture you gave at CESE some years ago about people protesting with phrases like "I'm not gay" and this sort of stuff. You know, it's the whole thing is terrible. But she is quite lonely and much more appreciated in the Germanic countries than in Belarus, where her children's story "Sumni Soup" won a prize, but she hasn't had a first prize for her poetry, as far as I know.
Thank you. And the question, Alan's question.
Is it about the late Vera Rich?
And her relationship with Aristide?
With me?
If any.
Well, I mean, think back.
Did she translate it? Was there an interaction between them in the noughties before Vera died?
Has Vera translated Hapiejeva's work?
No, of course not. So she stopped long before. She hasn't translated the late lamented Rosanna's poetry or much else. She stopped very early, I think. But don't ask about my relations with her because the Ice Age doesn't come into it.
It was Olga's relations with Vera we were actually asking about.
I think I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I doubt whether she's heard of that.
Thank you very much, Arnold.
And who are the main translators post Vera, would you say, Arnold, of Belarusian poetry or prose? You know, I know Jim translated prose, but who are other people? I
will just repeat Pavel's question in case you couldn't hear it. Who are the main, the question is to Arnold. And Pavel is asking who are nowadays main translators into English, translators of Belarusian poetry since Vera's operas, since Vera's time.
Well, I got a bee in my bonnet, and that is that translating poetry is a waste of time. And Vera was the only person at her height in the 60s that made a good job of it. And if you look at the Big Brother situation, translating Shakespeare, there are two big translations of Shakespeare. One which it makes poetry of it, but nothing to do with Shakespeare. And the other one is very literal and it just sounds awful.
Thank you. I have a question to Matthew. Thank you very much for your paper, Matthew. I was very interested to hear about the genre of reality dystopia. And I would like to your opinion on what's the future for that genre now that we are facing dystopian reality in Belarus. Will there be more dystopian novels written, or that is all in the past? Is Matthew here?
Oh, yes, thank you for the question. That is a very good question. I know that Viktor Martinovich, since 2009 and since he wrote Paranoia, he actually has written, I think, 2 other dystopian works, which I'll be honest, I have not read. And I know another contemporary writer, Okhard Bakharovich, has also dabbled in dystopian literature in Belarus. So unfortunately, I think there is a future for the genre. I think it still resonates and it's still important. And I think it will continue to thrive. It also thrives in Russian literature. So unfortunately, I think it has a future.
Thank you very much. And if there are any more questions?
I don't think we got an answer to my question.
Your question to Anna?
Aristide and Anna.
Aristide and Anna. I'm sorry.
They heard it, so they-
I'm very sorry. Over to you.
Yes, I think I remember the question. It was about the video recordings and the video content and music. Yes, so it does. It is important, and we are trying to archive some of that. And I just checked, and out of 339 sites that archived right now, 77 are listed as videos, and 16 are listed as songs. So, and of course, we could, one could do more, but since the archive is, a general in scope, we had to, take care of everything else as well. But I am happy. I'm always happy to add more. So we'll just work on that. And if you think that, if you have a list maybe already, if there is a list somewhere, list of links, please send it my way. We'll try to do it. I think you mentioned 500 maybe songs. I don't promise to archive 500 songs right away, immediately, but we can do it over the course of a couple of years. Try to at least. Thank you.
Thank you. Aristide? We can't hear you.
Right. One of the things that Anna said, the archives are generally very specific, like the one, or very general, like the one she's working on, or very specific, like the one that I've been working on. So we just have to hope that somewhere there's a musicologist doing something somewhere. But that's really all we can do.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Well, I would like to thank all the participants for your papers and for this fascinating discussion and for answering all the questions.